I'm at a place my change has been on you.
That song reminds me of Levine.
Levine's the singer of the band.
No! What I meant by Levine was the theorist who came up with the conservation model of nursing.
Tell me more about her.
Are you sure? You might get bored though.
You have my attention.
Starting off, the Levine I mentioned was Myra Estrin Levine. She became a private duty nurse, a civilian nurse in U.S. Army, a pre-clinical instructor in the physical science at Cook County School of Nursing, director of nursing at Drexel Home in Chicago, surgical supervisor at both the University of Chicago Clinics and Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. She worked her way up the academic ranks at Bryan Memorial Hospital, Cook County School of Nursing, Loyola University, Rush University, University of Illinois. Chaired the Department of Clinical Nursing at Cook County School of Nursing. Coordinated the graduate nursing program in oncology at Rush University. She became the director of the Department of Continuing Education at Evanston Hospital and consultant to the department. She was an adjunct professor at Humanistic Studies at the University of Illinois. She also became a professor emerita, medical surgical nursing at University of Illinois at Chicago, and went to Tel Aviv University, Israel as a visiting associate professor and returned as a visiting professor. She was also a visiting professor at Rekanati School of Nursing, Ben-Gurion University of Negev at Beersheba, Israel. She received numerous honors, including Charter Fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. She was an honorary member of the American Mental Health Aid to Israel, and she received honorary recognition from the Illinois Nurses Association. She was the first recipient of the Elizabeth Russell Belford Award for Excellence in Teaching from Sigma Theta Tau. Her first and second edition of her book, Introduction to Clinical Nursing, received American Journal of Nursing Book of the Year's Award, and her book Renewal for Nursing translated into Hebrew was recognized by the Alpha Lambda chapter of Sigma Theta Tau for her outstanding contributions to nursing in 1990. She was awarded an honorary doctorate of human letters from Loyola University, Chicago at the mid-year convocation, and she retired on the year 1987. Introduction to Clinical Nursing was her first edition book published in 1969, while the second edition of the book was published in 1973, and she died on March 20, 1996 at 75 years old. She wanted to find a way to teach the major concepts in medical surgical nursing and attempt to teach associate degree students a new approach for daily nursing activities. She never intended to develop theory, but she developed a conceptual organizational structure for teaching medical surgical nursing that stimulated theory development.
Wow, she lived a great life. But before you continue your story, I have to go to the restroom real quick. Be right back. All that running got me really tired.
That actually explained in one of her principles. Shall we go back to the story?
Please!
Before being able to come up with a theory, she was inspired by the ideas of fellow theorists. First, Myra Levine credited Florence Nightingale with the importance of observation to the process of nursing. Levine indicated that Nightingale provided great attention to energy conservation and recognized the need for structural integrity. Levine relates Nightingale's discussion of social integrity to Nightingale's concern for sanitation, which she says implies an interaction between the person and the environment. Second was Irene Beland, who was Myra's teacher and thesis advisor. Beland influenced her thinking about nursing as a compassionate art and rigid intellectual pursuit. Third was Bernard, who was recognized for his contribution in the identification of the interdependence of bodily function. Fourth, she used Bates' description of the external environment as having three components. First, perceptual, those perceived through sensory input. Second, operational, threats with the environment. And third, conceptual, includes cultural and personal values about healthcare. Fifth, she included Selye's definition of stress in her description of her organismic stress response as being recorded over time and influenced by the accumulated experience of the individual. 6. The perceptual organismic response incorporates Gibson's work on perception as a mediator of behavior. His identification of the 5 perceptual systems, including hearing, sight, touch, taste, and smell, contributed to the development of the perceptual response. 7. The notion that individuals seek to defend their personhood is grounded in Goldstein's explanation of the soldiers who, despite brain injury, sought to cling to some semblance of self-awareness. Lastly, Dubow's discussion of adaptability of the organism helps support Levine's explanation that adaptation occurs within a range of responses.
Wow, she was inspired. So what really is the focus of the theory?
Levine developed her conservation model to provide a framework to teach begin nursing students. The conservation model of nursing is just as applicable to nursing practice and nursing science now as when it was initially developed, because Levine said, everywhere that nursing is essential, the rules of conservation and integrity hold. The first principle was conservation of energy, which focuses on the balance of energy input and output to prevent excessive fatigue. The second was the conservation of structural integrity, which involves maintaining the structure of the body to promote normal functioning. The third was conservation of personal integrity, which involves the maintenance of one's sense of personal worth and self-esteem. Last is the conservation of social integrity, which acknowledges the patient is a social being.
Her theory makes so much sense to me now.
There's more! Levine's conservation model is focused in promoting adaptation and maintaining the wholeness using the principles of conservation. This model guides the nurse to focus on the influences and responses of the patient to be able to make an accurate and effective nursing care. The nurse accomplishes the goals of the model through conservation of energy, structure, personal and social integrity. Environment is the context in which individuals live their lives. It completes the wholeness of an individual. Every person or individual actively participates in his environment, either in his internal or external environment. Internal environment refers to the physiological and pathophysiological process that happens in a person's body, while the external environment is composed of perceptual, operational, and conceptual components. A change in environment may lead or cause a disruption of wholeness that might lead to a threat to energy balance, threat to structural integrity, threat to personal integrity, and threat to social integrity. As nurses, our therapeutic and supportive nursing interventions using the conservation principle of conserving energy, structural integrity, personal integrity, and social integrity is very important in order for the patient to adapt his present condition. Concepts. Number 1. Wholeness, health, integrity, or holism. The person is described as a unique individual that strives to preserve his wholeness and integrity. Levine used the word integrity to encompass the wholeness of the individual and the sense of independence and selfhood of the person. According to Levine, conserving the integrity of the individual is the hallmark of nursing intervention. In Levine's view, healing is the defense of wholeness. Adaptation is needed for conserving the wholeness of the person in the midst of constant environmental change. It is a process by which individuals fit the environment in which they live. Adaptation is the process of change whereby the individual retains his integrity within the realities of his environment. If the patient was able to adapt, then the conservation of wholeness is achieved. There will be energy balance, structural integrity, personal integrity, and social integrity. Thus, the person or individual may return to his daily activities. Environment. The environment consists of an internal environment and external environment. Both are in constant interaction. In discussing the internal environment, Levine uses the conceptualization by Claude Bernard in the 19th century of the Milnois intern. Bernard identified the primordial seas captured within the integument of the human body and providing the organism with a tightly regulated solution of substances essential to its continued well-being. Levine uses Bates' description of the external environment as having three components. Number 1, perceptual, aspects of the world that individuals intercept and interpret with their sense organs. Number 2, operational, environmental components that physically affect individuals, although they cannot directly perceive them, such as microorganisms. Number 3, conceptual, characterized by cultural patterns, spirituality, and aspects mediated through the symbols of language, thought, and history. Organismic response, integrated or holistic response. The human being responds to forces in his environment in a singular yet integrated fashion, in a way which is peculiar to him and to him alone. The term organismic reflects the language of the biology of living organism with multiple components working together to generate a whole integrated organismic response. Levine noted that every response is an organismic one, no other kind is possible, and every adaptive change is accomplished by the entire individual. Levine identifies at least 4 levels of protective organismic response, each physiologically predetermined and each used to protect the organism so that it make a viable adaptation to its environment. Nursing care focuses on the management of these integrated organismic responses, which include: Number 1, response to fear, fight or flight. The most primitive response, these adrenocortical sympathetic reactions are activated whenever individuals perceive that they are threatened, whether or not a threat actually exists. Hospitalization, illness, and new experience elicit this response. Individuals respond by being on the alert to gather more information and ensure their safety and well-being. Number 2, inflammatory-immune response. The mechanism that protects the organism from environmental irritants and pathogens. The inflammatory immune response is a way of healing, however, it drains energy reserves. Many nursing interventions focus on supporting the reparative components of the inflammatory immune process while minimizing tissue damage. Environmental control to minimize exposure to irritants and pathogens is also an important focus of nursing care. Number 3, response to stress. Levine built on Selye's model of adaptive stress response, characterized by predictable behavioral and biological responses to various nonspecific stressors of life. Selye referred to the adaptive energy expended over time to respond to stressors and noted that long-term stress can take a toll on the individual, sometimes leading to a state of exhaustion when adaptive energy is depleted. Irreversible stress-induced structural tissue changes can also occur. Number 4, sensory response. This response is generated through perceptual awareness as individuals experience the world around them through sensory stimuli. Individuals are constantly immersed in an environmental background of sensory input that never ceases, even during sleep. Responsiveness to the sensory input prompts individuals to maintain safety and seek wholeness. Nursing intervention must be founded not only on scientific knowledge, but specifically on recognition of the individual's behavioral responses, which indicate the nature of adaptation taking place. The goal of nursing care is to support adaptation and the strong drive of the individual to seek wholeness. Because of the uniqueness of each individual, nursing care for each patient must be highly individualized. Levine specifically viewed the individual receiving nursing care as a patient, not as a client, to emphasize the nursing goal of returning the patient to a state of wholeness and health, restoring as much independence as possible. Nursing interventions are both therapeutic and supportive in nature. Therapeutic nursing care focuses on enhancing adaptation and improving well-being. Supportive interventions are used when nursing care is unable to improve the adaptive response or fail to halt a downhill course, including nursing care for the dying patient. Conservation. Conservation is from the Latin word conservatio, which means to keep together. Conservation is a natural law which describes the way complex systems are able to continue to function even when severely challenged. Through conservation, individuals are able to confront challenges, adapt accordingly, and maintain their uniqueness. The 4 conservation principles. Nursing principles are fundamental assumptions which provide a unifying structure for understanding a wide variety of nursing activities. Levine proposed 4 conservation principles to guide nursing care which have as postulate the unity and integrity of the individual. Conservation of energy. All of life's processes are fundamentally dependent upon the production and expenditure of energy. The individual requires a balance of energy and a constant renewal of energy to maintain life activities. Conservation of energy is typical of the natural defense against disease processes. Conservation of structural integrity. Structure and function are strongly interrelated complementary aspects of the human organism. Therefore, nursing interventions to ensure adequate energy to support life process must be balanced by interventions to conserve the normal structure of the body. All nursing care should maintain a continual rehabilitative focus to minimize structural damage and prevent disability. Levine noted that all varieties of surgical intervention are designed to restore and redesign structural integrity, and every infection is an assault of structural integrity. Conservation of personal integrity. Conservation of personal integrity is based in a valuing of self-identity, self-worth, and self-respect, also reflecting the understanding that the body does not exist separately from the mind, emotions, and soul. Nursing interventions to conserve integrity include interventions to teach patients, promote patient participation in decision-making and consent to treatment, and protect patient privacy, personal possessions, and support of cultural practices. The patient's quest to preserve personal integrity can also be seen through the patient's unique psychological and behavioral responses to health challenges. The goal of the nurse is to support the patient's individual adaptive response such that personal integrity is fortified and to impart knowledge and strength so that the individual can resume a private life, no longer a patient and no longer dependent. Conservation of social integrity. Social integrity is reflected in dynamic relationships among human beings. Family is a critical social unit, and the life of each individual is woven in the fabric of family with a constitution of the social group that is family defined by each individual patient. Nursing care to conserve social integrity also includes interventions to assist the patient with maintaining ethnic and subcultural affiliations of community and supporting any socially connected religious needs. The nurse-patient interaction is also a social relationship in which the patient can see his integrity mirrored in that of the nurse.
Hey, you two seem to be talking about something serious.
Dave, we were just talking about Levine's conservation model of nursing. I know you know a lot about it. Care to share its importance to nursing practice?
Sure thing. Us nurses have to consider the patient as a whole being. Our nursing goal should be to promote the wholeness of the patient through adaptation in his or her present condition. It means that our nursing care plan includes the 4 conservation principles. Say for example, the nurses in the trauma ward. For the first principle, the conservation of energy, irrespective of the severity of the trauma, the patient needs rest. The presence of family members and significant others is also very important for the psychological and emotional support, since a trauma patient is also in high level of psychological, emotional stress. The second principle, the conservation of structural integrity for a trauma patient, expect some skin damage, which may be minor or major depending on the severity of the trauma. Bone fracture is also common. If the structural integrity is already compromised for a trauma patient, it is our responsibility as a nurse to implement measures to promote healing and to prevent further deterioration. If a patient is on bed rest, skin protocol is a must. Hourly change of position. Other nursing interventions include dressing of wounds under aseptic technique to prevent infection, maintaining alignment of bones through skin skeletal traction as ordered by the doctor, and preparing the patient for emergency surgery to prevent loss of function of a body part, or in some cases, to prevent possible loss of a body part. The third principle, the conservation of personal integrity, is to show respect to the patient and maintain his privacy. Call him by his preferred name and do not forget to introduce yourself to him. Include him in his plan of care. It will help retain his self-worth. For the last principle, the conservation of social integrity, the presence of family and friends at bedside gives a positive effect on the patient's well-being. Promote interaction as tolerated by his condition. This makes the patient feel that he still belongs despite his condition.
I have learned a lot and gained some tips in caring for patients in this conversation of ours. I hope to learn more about the other theories someday. Thank you.